Did you really think you could just walk in here like you belong? Daniel's voice cuts through the gala like a blade. Every head turns. His ex-wife Elena stands frozen in the doorway. He's about to destroy her in front of everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the woman who once thought she could stand beside me, and failed. Laughter ripples through the crowd. Daniel raises his champagne, savoring his moment of revenge. But then the host grabs the microphone. Before we continue, it's my honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, the CEO of Carter Enterprises, Elena Carter. The hall explodes in applause. Daniel's glass trembles. His smirk dies. The woman he came to humiliate just became the most powerful person in the room. What happened next changed everything he thought he knew about power. Tell me, if you were Elena, walking into a room where your ex was ready to humiliate you, but you had the upper hand, how would you handle it? Comment below. I'd love to hear your take. Welcome back, my family and friends. I've missed you all so much. Thank you for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. Before we continue, I want to remind you that creating stories like this takes me hours of writing, research, and editing just to bring you something special and meaningful. So, if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to click the subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Your support really means the world to me and helps us create even more powerful stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's continue. 2 years before that unforgettable gala, Elena Carter's world had collapsed like a house of cards. The divorce papers had landed on her desk not with discussion, but with a courier's knock. Daniel hadn't even had the decency to face her. After 8 years of marriage, he discarded her like she was nothing more than an accessory that no longer matched his lifestyle. The tabloids feasted on the story. Billionaire splits from wife. Sources say she wasn't enough. Elena remembered sitting alone in the apartment that night, staring at the headlines glowing on her phone. Her hands shook, not from anger but from shame. Shame because she had given up her career dreams to support Daniel's empire. Shame because she had allowed herself to fade into the background while he shined. Shame because the world now saw her as a failure. She cried until the sun rose. But what the world didn't know was that Elena Carter was not broken. She was simply hidden, like a seed waiting for its season. The first months after the divorce were brutal. She had no company, no position, no financial cushion. Daniel made sure of that. Friends who once filled her social calendar disappeared overnight. The same people who toasted at her wedding now whispered about her, as if she were a cautionary tale. Still, Elena refused to drown. She picked up a pen, dusted off her old notebooks, and reignited the passion she had once buried: business strategy and innovation. She remembered the late nights during her MBA, the bold ideas she sketched in margins, the vision she once had before Daniel convinced her that her place was behind the scenes. Slowly, she began to build. At first, it was small consulting projects from her kitchen table. She poured every cent she had into research and networking. Failure greeted her more times than success, but each rejection hardened her resolve. By the end of the first year, she had secured a breakthrough deal with a mid-sized tech firm. That deal became her stepping stone, and from there she climbed. Meanwhile, Daniel basked in his empire. Whitmore Industries was his crown jewel, and he wore it proudly. Interviews, magazine covers, charity balls, he lived for the spotlight. His new girlfriend, a model half his age, was draped on his arm at every event. To him, the divorce was proof of his superiority. He had moved on, richer and more powerful than ever, while Elena had been left in the dust. At least, that's what he believed. What Daniel never knew was that Elena's dust had transformed into gold. She had founded Carter Enterprises, a firm that combined innovation with impact. Within 18 months, she had carved her own empire, one that challenged even the biggest corporations in the field. Her leadership style, quiet but fierce, empathetic but unyielding, won her respect Daniel had never managed to earn. Yet Elena never bragged. She didn't chase the tabloids or seek revenge. She worked in silence, waiting for the day when her presence alone would speak louder than any headline. And that day arrived with the gala. Daniel thought it was his stage. But for Elena, it was the moment she had unknowingly prepared for all along. Viewers, let me ask you, if life stripped you of everything you once relied on, would you have the strength to start over from scratch? Or would bitterness consume you? Think about it. 2 years before that unforgettable gala, Elena Carter's world had collapsed like a house of cards. The divorce papers had landed on her desk not with discussion, but with a courier's knock. Daniel hadn't even had the decency to face her. After 8 years of marriage, he discarded her like she was nothing more than an accessory that no longer matched his lifestyle. The tabloids feasted on the story. Billionaire splits from wife. Sources say she wasn't enough. Elena remembered sitting alone in the apartment that night, staring at the headlines glowing on her phone. Her hands shook, not from anger but from shame. Shame because she had given up her career dreams to support Daniel's empire. Shame because she had allowed herself to fade into the background while he shined. Shame because the world now saw her as a failure. She cried until the sun rose. But what the world didn't know was that Elena Carter was not broken. She was simply hidden, like a seed waiting for its season. The first months after the divorce were brutal. She had no company, no position, no financial cushion. Daniel made sure of that. Friends who once filled her social calendar disappeared overnight. The same people who toasted at her wedding now whispered about her, as if she were a cautionary tale. Still, Elena refused to drown. She picked up a pen, dusted off her old notebooks, and reignited the passion she had once buried: business strategy and innovation. She remembered the late nights during her MBA, the bold ideas she sketched in margins, the vision she once had before Daniel convinced her that her place was behind the scenes. Slowly, she began to build. At first, it was small consulting projects from her kitchen table. She poured every cent she had into research and networking. Failure greeted her more times than success, but each rejection hardened her resolve. By the end of the first year, she had secured a breakthrough deal with a mid-sized tech firm. That deal became her stepping stone, and from there she climbed. Meanwhile, Daniel basked in his empire. Whitmore Industries was his crown jewel, and he wore it proudly. Interviews, magazine covers, charity balls, he lived for the spotlight. His new girlfriend, a model half his age, was draped on his arm at every event. To him, the divorce was proof of his superiority. He had moved on, richer and more powerful than ever, while Elena had been left in the dust. At least, that's what he believed. What Daniel never knew was that Elena's dust had transformed into gold. She had founded Carter Enterprises, a firm that combined innovation with impact. Within 18 months, she had carved her own empire, one that challenged even the biggest corporations in the field. Her leadership style, quiet but fierce, empathetic but unyielding, won her respect Daniel had never managed to earn. Yet Elena never bragged. She didn't chase the tabloids or seek revenge. She worked in silence, waiting for the day when her presence alone would speak louder than any headline. And that day arrived with the gala. Daniel thought it was his stage. But for Elena, it was the moment she had unknowingly prepared for all along. Viewers, let me ask you, if life stripped you of everything you once relied on, would you have the strength to start over from scratch? Or would bitterness consume you? Think about it. And as Daniel stood frozen among the glittering crowd, he knew something he would never admit aloud. He had underestimated her. Again. But this time, she wasn't the one who would pay the price. Viewers, let me pause here and ask, have you ever seen someone rise from the ashes, surprising everyone who doubted them? Maybe you've even lived that story yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. The applause that followed Elena's introduction lingered in the hall like an echo Daniel couldn't escape. He stood stiff, his jaw tight, while cameras flashed and hands clapped in rhythm for a woman he had convinced himself was nothing without him. His girlfriend, Madison, tugged lightly at his arm. "Daniel, are you all right?" He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Elena as she ascended the stage with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. The spotlight bathed her in a glow he had once believed only he could command. And yet, here she was thriving, radiant, commanding respect that felt stolen from him. Daniel clenched his fist. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. He had planned for her embarrassment, not his own. Elena adjusted the microphone with a steady hand. For a moment, the room hushed, waiting. She could feel Daniel's glare burning into her from across the hall, but she refused to let it shake her. Tonight wasn't about him. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm yet powerful. "It's an honor to stand here tonight, among so many incredible leaders and visionaries. 2 years ago, I would never have imagined this moment. Back then, I had lost almost everything I thought defined me: status, stability, and the life I believed would last forever." The audience leaned in. Even those who had whispered cruel things about her after the divorce now sat riveted. "But what I learned," Elena continued, "is that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover who you truly are. Adversity doesn't destroy us. It introduces us to the strength we didn't know we had. Her words weren't grandiose, yet they carried a weight that silenced even the most cynical ears. Daniel's face burned. Each syllable felt like a personal rebuke. He shifted in his seat, forcing a smirk, pretending not to care. But deep inside, a knot twisted tighter with every clap of approval. Later that night, after Elena's speech received a standing ovation, Daniel slipped away from the main hall. He needed air. Or maybe he needed control. He found himself pacing near the balcony. The city lights sprawled beneath him like a mockery of his once unquestioned power. His phone buzzed, a text from a fellow executive. Didn't know your ex was running Carter Enterprises. Impressive. Daniel's teeth ground together. Impressive. The word stung. Elena's name, once synonymous with weakness in his mind, was now being spoken with admiration by the same circle that had once praised him. Unacceptable. Over the next week, Daniel couldn't shake the image of her. Every headline, every news article about the Gala mentioned her name alongside words like visionary, resilient, powerful. He felt suffocated by her success, as if it was designed solely to overshadow him. At Whitmore Industries, his board members dropped subtle comments. Partnership with Carter Enterprises could be strategic, one suggested during a meeting. They're making significant strides in areas we've been struggling with. Daniel cut him off sharply. We don't need them. Whitmore Industries stands on its own. But even as he spoke, a seed of insecurity rooted deeper. That night, he called in his private investigator. I want everything on her, Daniel demanded. Her company, her finances, her investors. Find out how she built it, who's backing her, and most importantly, where her weaknesses are. The investigator hesitated. With respect, sir, from what I've seen, she doesn't have many. Daniel's glare hardened. Everyone has weaknesses. Dig deeper. While Daniel's obsession grew, Elena continued her quiet rise. Her days were filled with meetings, negotiations, and moments of mentorship with young entrepreneurs who looked up to her. She had discovered a purpose far greater than competing with Daniel, lifting others who had once felt invisible, just as she had. One evening, after a long day, she sat in her office overlooking the city. Her assistant placed a stack of invitations on her desk. Among them was one that caught her attention. An invitation to an international summit where the world's most influential business leaders would gather. Elena smiled faintly. This was more than recognition. It was an opportunity to shape change on a global scale. Yet she also knew that Daniel wouldn't stay silent. She could sense his bitterness even across the crowded gala hall. He wasn't the type to let humiliation fade quietly. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her path. Daniel's investigator returned 2 weeks later with a thick file. She's clean, he admitted reluctantly, placing the folder on Daniel's desk. Her company is legitimate, her finances are solid, and she has the respect of some of the most influential investors in the world. There's nothing to exploit. Daniel snatched the file, flipping through it with frustration. His eyes narrowed on a photo of Elena shaking hands with a prominent tech billionaire. Nothing to exploit? Daniel muttered. No, there has to be something. Nobody rises this fast without help. Without secrets. The investigator shifted uneasily. With all due respect, sir, maybe she's just better than you think. The words hit Daniel like a slap. He dismissed the man, but the echo lingered. Better than you think. Meanwhile, whispers began circulating in social circles. Daniel's behavior at the gala hadn't gone unnoticed. Some called it cruel, others pitiful. For a man once admired for his charm, the perception was beginning to shift. At a charity luncheon, a fellow CEO approached him. You know, Daniel, it's admirable how Elena's bounced back. People love a comeback story. Perhaps instead of trying to overshadow her, you should consider aligning with her. Daniel forced a smile, but inside rage seethed. Align with her? Never. That night, he poured himself another glass of whiskey, staring out over the city's skyline. Elena was everywhere. In the papers, in conversations, in his own mind. He told himself it was about reputation, about business. But deep down, he knew it was more. It was personal. He couldn't bear that she had flourished without him. And worse, that the world no longer needed him to define her. The tension was no longer just public. It was private, gnawing at Daniel's core. He began making mistakes at Whitmore Industries. Decisions rushed. Tempers flared. The board grew uneasy. And still, every headline about Elena only tightened the grip of shame around his throat. One evening, after another restless night, Daniel whispered into the empty room. I will find a way to break her. But what he didn't know was that his quest to expose Elena would uncover truths he wasn't prepared to face. Truths that would turn his shame into something far more unbearable. Before we move forward, let me ask you, why do you think some people can't stand to see others succeed without them? Is it pride, jealousy, or something deeper? Comment below. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Daniel could feel the weight of the night slipping through his fingers. Every time Elena spoke, the room leaned toward her. Every laugh, every nod, every moment of applause seemed like a dagger twisting in his pride. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had invited half the city's elite here, sure that they would remember him as the man at the center of it all. Instead, they were rallying around Elena, the ex-wife he had written off as weak. No, Daniel thought, jaw tightening. This ends tonight. He wasn't about to leave the gala as a shadow in her spotlight. As the orchestra struck up another piece, Daniel slipped away from the crowd and into the corner of the hall where the event's MC stood, reviewing the schedule. Quick adjustment, Daniel said smoothly, flashing the confident smile that had won him favors all his life. We'll add a little segment before the charity auction. Trust me, it'll play beautifully with the crowd. The MC hesitated. I'm not sure, Mr. Whitmore. We're all ready. Do you know who underwrote half of this gala? Daniel cut in, lowering his voice. I think we can afford 5 minutes, don't you? Reluctantly, the MC nodded. Very well. Daniel's smirk returned. His plan was simple. He'd call Elena back to the stage under the guise of honoring her, then blindside her with a story from their past. Something humiliating. Something to shatter the poised image she had so carefully built. Yes, he thought. That'll remind her. That'll remind everyone. Meanwhile, Elena was speaking quietly with the event's sponsor, a kind-hearted older woman named Margaret who admired her tenacity. You carry yourself so gracefully, dear, Margaret said warmly. It's inspiring to see how far you've come. Elena smiled softly. Compliments still felt new to her, after years of being dismissed. But she accepted them with gratitude. Thank you, she replied. I believe in standing tall, even when people expect you to bend. Margaret patted her hand. That's what makes you different. Before Elena could respond, the MC's voice echoed across the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to tonight's charity auction, we have a special moment. Please welcome once again Elena Carter. Applause rose again, though this time Elena felt a prickle of unease. She hadn't been told of another speech. Still, she walked toward the stage, head high, refusing to let doubt show on her face. Daniel's heart pounded as she approached the microphone. He motioned to the MC to step aside and took the stage himself, standing just a few feet from Elena. Friends, Daniel began, his voice smooth, his smile wide. We've all had the privilege of hearing Elena speak tonight. She's painted herself as strong, accomplished, unstoppable. And yes, she has achieved much. There was polite applause, though some in the audience sensed a strange edge in his tone. But, Daniel continued, pausing for dramatic effect, since we're all friends here, perhaps we should remember the Elena I knew. The Elena behind the image. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Elena stood still, her eyes fixed on him, giving nothing away. Daniel's smirk widened. He had them hooked. Let me tell you a story, he said, pacing slowly across the stage. Our first gala together years ago. She was so nervous. Couldn't even hold a glass without spilling it. I had to tell her not to embarrass me in front of the board members. The poor thing nearly cried in the restroom before we left. A few guests chuckled uncertainly. Others shifted, discomfort clear on their faces. Daniel pressed on, emboldened. And that wasn't the only time. She once forgot the name of a donor during a dinner, right in front of him. I had to smooth it over. That's who she really is, someone who never belonged in this world. Someone who only stood beside me because I allowed it. Gasps broke out. The cruelty in his words was no longer veiled. Daniel turned toward Elena, expecting to see her crumble, expecting to see shame flicker across her face. Instead, he was met with something else, calm. She took the microphone from its stand, her hand steady, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Daniel, she said softly, her voice carrying through the hall. You've reminded me of those nights. Yes, I was nervous. Yes, I stumbled. And yes, I cried. Because I was married to a man who thrived on my weakness instead of helping me grow. The room fell silent. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. But here's the truth you forgot. Every stumble taught me resilience. Every tear pushed me closer to strength. and every attempt to silence me only made me more determined to find my own voice. Applause began to rise, scattered at first, then swelling into thunderous support. Elena's gaze never left Daniel's. You wanted to humiliate me tonight, but instead, you've reminded everyone that true strength isn't about tearing others down. It's about rising, no matter how many times someone tries to push you under. Daniel's smirk had vanished. His face flushed crimson as whispers rippled through the crowd, not about Elena's flaws, but about his cruelty. Elena stepped back from the microphone, leaving the hall ringing with applause and Daniel standing frozen in the spotlight he had tried to claim. For the first time, Daniel realized the unthinkable. He hadn't humiliated her. He had humiliated himself. Be honest, if you were Elena, standing on that stage with your ex trying to drag you down, would you have answered him calmly? Or would you have unleashed years of pent-up truth? Comment below. I want to know what kind of strength you would show. For a long moment, the gala hall seemed suspended in silence. Then the applause thundered again, echoing off the gilded walls and crashing down on Daniel like a tidal wave. But this wasn't applause for him. It wasn't admiration, the lifeblood he usually drank from. No, this was a celebration of Elena's strength. Every hand that clapped was a nail in the coffin of his pride. Daniel stood there, frozen, his smile fractured, his posture stiff. He tried to laugh it off, to gesture like it had all been part of some clever game, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Their eyes had shifted. Where once they looked at him with respect, or at least fear, they now looked at him with something sharper, disgust. At the nearest table, a man whispered, "Did you hear the way he spoke to her?" "I always knew he was arrogant," another replied. "But to humiliate his ex-wife in public? That's low." Margaret, the elderly sponsor who had encouraged Elena earlier, shook her head. That poor girl. She carried herself with such grace, and he tried to destroy her. And look, she's the one standing tall. All around, the whispers grew into a current, flowing from table to table. And Daniel, though he tried to ignore it, felt every word piercing through his armor. Elena, meanwhile, had already stepped down from the stage. She didn't need to linger in the spotlight. Her words had done their work, and she walked with a quiet dignity that drew more admiration than Daniel's bravado ever had. People rose from their chairs, not to follow Daniel, but to greet her. "Elena, that was inspiring. You showed real courage up there. You've given us all something to think about." Elena smiled politely, humbly, but she didn't let the praise swell her ego. She only nodded, grateful, as if she understood that this moment wasn't just about her. It was about anyone who had ever been silenced, belittled, or underestimated. Daniel tried to salvage the evening. He clapped his hands once, too loudly. "Well," he said, forcing a chuckle. "That was entertaining, wasn't it?" But the room didn't respond. Only a few awkward laughs echoed back, brittle and hollow. His girlfriend, standing at their table in a glittering dress, shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, she didn't look at him with admiration. She looked embarrassed. She quietly excused herself, muttering something about needing air, and slipped toward the exit. Daniel felt his chest tighten. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He stormed off the stage, weaving through the crowd, desperate to regain control. But everywhere he turned, faces looked away. Conversations quieted when he approached. Some people even stepped aside, not out of respect, but as though they didn't want to be tainted by association. "Daniel," a board member called softly, catching his arm. For a brief second, Daniel thought he'd found an ally. But the man leaned in and hissed, "What were you thinking? That was disgraceful. Investors will hear about this." Daniel's jaw clenched. He pulled free, pretending not to care, but the sting cut deep. Meanwhile, Elena had found a quiet corner where Margaret joined her, resting a gentle hand on her arm. "My dear," Margaret said warmly, "you've just shown this entire room what true dignity looks like. That man, he tried to make you small. But you showed us what it means to rise." Elena's eyes softened. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," she said. I've learned that staying silent only feeds people like him. And I won't do that anymore." Margaret nodded approvingly. "And you shouldn't. The world needs voices like yours." Across the room, Daniel watched, seething. He had thought this night would prove once and for all that Elena was beneath him. Instead, it had revealed the truth. She was not only his equal, she had surpassed him. The humiliation settled over him like a suffocating cloak. For the first time in his life, Daniel Whitmore, the man who prided himself on control, on winning, felt powerless. And the more powerless he felt, the more he realized something chilling. This wasn't Elena's revenge. This was his own doing. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every attempt to belittle her had only made her stronger. He had forged his own downfall with his arrogance. The auction proceeded, but Daniel barely heard it. He sat at his table, untouched champagne glass before him, as Elena's name was whispered again and again, her influence growing in real time. By the end of the night, it was Elena, graceful, composed, radiant, who was left surrounded by allies, well-wishers, and potential partners. Daniel left alone. For the first time in years, no one followed him out the door. Viewers, let me ask you, have you ever seen someone try to tear another person down, only to end up exposing their own weakness? How did it make you feel watching justice play out in real life? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. The gala hall was still buzzing, but for Daniel, the sounds had dulled into a suffocating hum. He stood frozen, his once proud shoulders slumped, his hands trembling as the reality sank deeper with every second. This was supposed to be his night, his grand act of revenge. Instead, he was the one exposed, vulnerable, and pitted. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't see admiration in the eyes of the crowd, only judgment, amusement, and whispers that cut him deeper than any blade. He tried to smile, but it faltered. His throat tightened, and then the memories came rushing back. He remembered the day he had walked away from Elena, sneering as if she were a chapter of his life he could rip out and discard. He had thought she would crumble without him, that she would spend her days begging to return. But now, looking at her, he realized just how wrong he had been. Elena stood glowing, not because of the diamonds on her wrist or the gown she wore, but because of the undeniable power in her presence. She had weathered storms, survived heartbreak, and risen from ashes he himself had set. Daniel's chest ached. For the first time, shame twisted into something more unbearable, regret. He wanted to speak, to salvage some shred of dignity, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he didn't mean it? That he had been blinded by pride and arrogance? But even if he said all that, would it matter now? Elena had already won. Not just the company, not just the moment, but the respect of every person in that room. Daniel's heart sank lower when he caught sight of Elena smiling. Not at him, but at the crowd, at her new reality, at the life she had built. She didn't even need him in her story anymore. And that was the darkest truth he had ever faced. The man who thought he had everything realized he was now the one with nothing. The room was still buzzing with murmurs, but Elena raised her hand slightly, and as if on cue, silence fell. All eyes turned to her, the woman who had just transformed a night of humiliation into triumph. Daniel felt his chest tighten. This was it, the moment he had dreaded, though he hadn't known it until now. Elena, his voice cracked, weak and unsteady. He tried again, louder this time, though the tremor remained. I didn't know. I never expected. She cut him off with a calm but sharp tone. No, Daniel. You didn't expect because you never cared to look. You assumed I'd stay broken, small, invisible. You wanted me to bow to you forever. Her words hit him like a storm. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement, others just watching with wide, fascinated eyes. Daniel's hand clenched at his side. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. For once, the man known for having the perfect words had none. Elena stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each sound punctuating her strength. But look at me now, she continued, her voice steady, powerful. Not because of you, but in spite of you. You tried to humiliate me tonight. Instead, you showed everyone what I've always known. Your arrogance blinds you. And your pride will always be your downfall. The audience erupted in applause. The sound wasn't just for Elena. It was for her victory, her resilience, her courage to stand before the man who once owned her heart and strip away his power in front of the world. Daniel's vision blurred for a second. He wasn't sure if it was from the bright lights or the sting in his eyes. Shame coursed through him, but beneath it, something else stirred. A desperate longing, not for her status or success, but for the woman he had lost. He stepped forward impulsively. Elena, please. Her gaze softened for just a moment. Enough for him to catch a glimpse of the warmth she once held for him. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by something stronger, resolve. This isn't about revenge, Daniel, she said quietly, so only those closest could hear, though the room seemed to hold its breath. It's about freedom. Mine. And maybe now yours too. Those words shattered him. Freedom. She had found hers by letting him go. And perhaps his only chance at redemption was to finally accept that. The applause thundered again as Elena turned, gracefully rejoining her circle of allies and admirers. Daniel remained where he was, isolated, exposed, and utterly transformed by the weight of truth. For the first time in years, he wasn't the man in control. He was just a man, ashamed, humbled, and forced to face the wreckage of his pride. And the world had witnessed it all. The thunderous applause slowly faded into a softer hum of conversation, but the energy in the gala was forever changed. Elena had not just reclaimed her dignity, she had risen above it all, untouchable, unshaken. Daniel stood alone, his tuxedo still sharp, his presence still commanding, yet for the first time, he felt like a shadow of the man he once was. All the arrogance, the control, the superiority, it had crumbled in one night. And yet, strangely, he didn't feel anger. What he felt was something deeper. A hollow ache, an emptiness carved out by the realization of what he had lost. Not just Elena's love, but her respect, her trust, her belief in him. Elena, meanwhile, moved through the room with grace. People congratulated her, shook her hand, and praised her brilliance. She smiled warmly, but her mind wasn't on the accolades. Her heart was lighter for another reason. For years, she had carried the weight of Daniel's betrayal, his attempts to make her feel small. Tonight, that burden was lifted. She no longer needed his validation or his apology. She was free. Still, as she turned, her gaze met Daniel's across the room. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The crowd melted away. It was just them, two people who once shared dreams, laughter, and love, now standing on opposite sides of a chasm pride had created. Daniel finally moved. Slowly, he approached her, his steps heavy, his eyes uncharacteristically vulnerable. The whispers followed him, but he didn't care. When he stood before her, he lowered his voice so only she could hear. Elena, I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. For everything. Elena studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, with a quiet sigh, she nodded. I know, Daniel. And maybe one day you'll learn to forgive yourself. Her words weren't bitter. They weren't meant to wound. They were gentle, almost kind. And that kindness broke Daniel more than anger ever could. She turned away, rejoining her circle of friends, her head held high. Daniel remained still, swallowing the lump in his throat. He knew this was the end of their story together, not in hatred, but in closure. And strangely, he felt grateful. Grateful that Elena had shown him a mirror tonight, that she had forced him to see the truth he had been running from. That pride without love, power without compassion, and success without humility were nothing but empty victories. As the night came to an end, Elena stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights shimmered, reflecting her new reality. She inhaled deeply, a smile tugging at her lips. She had survived betrayal. She had faced humiliation. And she had walked away not as a victim, but as a woman reborn. Her story wasn't about Daniel anymore. It was about her future, her freedom. And as she climbed into the waiting car, she knew this was only the beginning. Sometimes, the people who try hardest to break us end up teaching us the most about our strength. Elena's story is proof that dignity, resilience, and self-worth shine brighter than revenge. Backhand index pointing right. What do you think, dear listener? Would you have given Daniel another chance, or walked away just like Elena did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective and comment, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.